Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Law and Candor. I'm Paige, and I'm here with Bill Mariano. Today, we're digging into internal investigations with an important technology twist. With pressure to resolve matters efficiently while keeping costs down and best utilizing existing resources, handling internal investigations can be immensely challenging. We had the opportunity to talk to Justin Van Alstyne, Senior Corporate Counsel for Discovery and Information Governance at T-Mobile, about best practices for handling internal investigations, including the new tools and workflows that have been most effective. It was a great conversation. However, before diving into our discussion, we have to tell you more about our
Sightings of Radical Brilliance,
part of the show where we bring you the latest news of noteworthy innovation and acts of sheer genius. So today we're going to be talking about an MIT research project that talked about artificial intelligence and machine learning. You know, we all know AI productivity is booming, and the concept here from these researchers was really about how to understand using the capabilities and the limitations of artificial intelligence. And as we think about how it will impact jobs, and, you know, this is something we hear about in our industry all the time. Automation makes a ton of sense, but definitely makes people feel uneasy about their spot in the workforce.
The interesting thing about this one is everybody, I think gets, Paige, you sort of referred to this. I think everybody gets a little insecure about their place in the workforce when they think they're going to be supplanted by technology. And I think what this article touches on, and the MIT researchers are David Autor, David, if I mispronounced that, David Mindell, and Elizabeth Reynolds. I think what they touch on is how you can use AI to supplement the workforce rather than substitute the workforce, and train and upskill workforce to work alongside the new technologies and rebuild a dialogue with labor leaders for a mutually beneficial future. And this is something that I think, to your point, Paige, I think it relieves the anxiety around being replaced by a robot, replaced by machines. And it talks about having an ethical approach to leveraging AI so that you're really, you're using this advanced technology to drive innovation and augment work rather than replace your workers.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, you know, I know from our experience and working with clients, even being in the law firm, you know, once you understand where you can free yourself up by using automation, by using technology, everybody gets to level up their skill set. So it's getting over that initial hurdle of, you know, getting that buy-in and then seeing that you're not totally displaced, that there are many other opportunities, most often at a higher level. That's really exciting. So
at a much smaller scale, this was the argument 10 years ago that, you know, predictive coding was going to eliminate lawyers from document review. And that just never happened, right? It became a supplement to document review and not a substitute for human document review, right? And I think no matter how far that technology goes down the road, eventually you're ultimately going to need human interaction. And I think this research plan that was published by MIT Sloan Research, I think it suggests exactly that this is not something to be feared, but something that can be an ethical complement to the workforce.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah, great article.
All right, so now we're just going to get to our interview. Enjoy. Justin, what's up, man? Welcome to Law and Candor. And so, quick question. We've known each other quite, for a little bit now. And I don't think I've ever asked you this question. We ask it of all our guests. When you were a little kid, did you grow up and just want to get into e-discovery, or is there a more interesting story to this? Or has this been a lifelong ambition since you were like 5 or 6?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, no, definitely lifelong ambition, though. And,
you told your dad when you were 6 years old in Little League, Dad, you know what I really want to do?
That's right. Yeah, it's very, very, very normal upbringing, right? No, thanks for having me on, Bill. But my journey into e-discovery, like a lot of people's, was pretty long and winding. So I went to Tulane Law School, and originally I thought I was going to be a maritime lawyer. And so I clerked with a law firm in Washington, D.C., and then sort of the 08-09 recession happened, and, you know, we had to figure out kind of what was going on. And so I ended up going with a smaller firm in New Orleans to start my career. And when I got there, basically they didn't have anyone who did e-discovery, and so like, oh, you're young, you know, you're a strapping young man, of course you should you know about technology, of course, go be the e-discovery guy.
You must.
Right.
And nothing is anything except by comparison, so everybody else around you looked like they couldn't even program their phone, right? So
that's right. And this was still very much in the we're going to stick everything in a single PDF sort of mindset. So it was that's basically how I got into it.
So, Justin, how we collaborate and work has changed immensely over the years. And with that evolution, it just doesn't appear to be slowing down. How have the new tools and data sources complicated conducting internal investigations?
Well, I mean, as your question sort of presumes, there, one, the variety of sources is an issue. Specifically thinking here about like Slack and things like of that nature. Those are some of the most challenging data sets where you have to do a little bit of work preparing it for review, as opposed to something like email where you're just you pretty much, it's pretty self-serve. You can just stick it straight in. I would say the biggest thing is the volume. The volume has just absolutely exploded. So when you're doing things like you're searching for a Slack string or something like that, it's very difficult if you're looking. Let's say you're in an employment case and you're looking at like for DMs, right? Those are pretty simple. But then if we're doing something a little more complicated, like a fraud case or something like that, there's a lot more that we have to do to sort of figure out what is the language that these people are using, like, and trying to figure out the players there. So I think that the biggest thing is there's tons of different kinds of data now, but then on top of that, it's just the sheer volume of it necessitates that you're not going to be opening up a dummy Outlook profile, popping the stuff in and expecting to get a quality result anymore. I think that ship has sailed, and you really have to have a more organized and thought out process there.
So let's talk about that. You got into a little bit about the newer challenges that are emerging. So, how does that affect the way you have to approach these investigations differently and or prepare for them proactively, right? When it's in a company like yours, some of the large Fortune 500 companies, they're inevitable. So how do you set it up so that you're prepared going in and you're more proactive about your approach?
Well, so that's it kind of depends on what you're investigating there, Bill. I think for sure the preparation helps quite a bit. Like if you think about it from a process standpoint, as not so much leaving out technology a little bit, making sure that you've got your like first lines of who's going to do what when you have to kick off a very urgent, shall we say, internal investigation. And like my team, we tend to be handling like, the absolute top 1% internal investigations that are like most absolute most critical, whereas there's still a whole bunch of other ones that are in between. So I think that kind of dictates what you're going to do quite a bit, because really a lot of it is based around like, one, the biggest factor is what kind of speed do we need for an answer. Everyone always wants an answer now, but like what are the realistic timelines we're looking at here? Two, what kinds of data can I get my hands on immediately and start making decisions about how to get the rest of the data, right? Because, anytime you start an investigation, especially, when it's a real hot stove, you're going to be trying to do things in steps. And the biggest thing is making sure that, your first steps are sort of being able to scope the problem. And then after that, what you're trying to do, then eventually you're getting to completeness, right? And then making sure that my biggest thing, this probably isn't something anyone thinks of when they think of internal investigations, but my biggest thing is getting alignment with the organization and the business on what we're trying to do here, right? Like, what are our goals from this investigation? Sometimes it's more inchoate where it's going to be, you really don't know quite off the bat because you're not exactly sure what you're looking at. But I think that alignment is very important so that you can then right size whatever, or you can form your team, form your process, form your technology into driving at this goal. Sort of the typical begin with the end in mind spiel.
That makes sense. So, Justin, what workflows or approaches have you found are most flexible to respond to the variability of size or risk of these internal investigations?
Yeah, and I think that you've hit directly on. That is definitely the biggest thing there, is being able to scale, right? So you need a process that can go from what you think is a small, isolated, relatively technologically, not difficult set into a full blown, where we've got a relativity instance, we've got project managers, and we've got an entire army of reviewers going at it. And I think that's the biggest consideration there, is that I need to be able to have that flexibility and be able to use that fairly quickly, right? The other thing is that you really just have to think about what's the circle of people, right? And that's another thing that maybe people don't really think about as much in the workflow process, because you want to, one of our goals is usually that we're trying to get the facts before, we take action, right? This is like an investigation. So I'm trying to keep the number of people that are involved to the least that are possible. And I need tools that help me, manage that, right?
So we talked about staffing, preparedness, operations, process. Let's talk about a little bit about the technology. When you're choosing the right technology for an internal investigation, what are some of the high priority considerations? What are some of the features that you've been successful with, or that you'd be interested in hearing about? So as you start to, as I'm sure I know you do this, you're always looking to see what's available in the market. Is there anything new that came out?
So I think this goes back to my previous comment too about the flexibility, right? That's like the biggest thing that I need, but also, right, the ability to let in. So there are a number of ways to do this, right? Like you can think about an internal investigation, and there are going to be different reasons to make different decisions depending on, again, what your end objectives are and like what you're investigating, what you're trying to accomplish. But really the biggest thing, so being able to leverage something like AI in a relatively self-service environment, right? To me, that's an important consideration. And I think that's where e-discovery is going generally, towards a more, we're going to be using AI to make more and more and more decisions about documents. And people are still at varying levels of comfort with that. But I think especially like in the internal investigation space, that's one where you're really looking at the ideal use case, because the client right now is just the business. I'm not usually on these, it depends, but usually I'm not dealing with a regulator or anything like that at that point. That would come later down the line. So I don't have as many limitations on what I can do. I don't have to like approve, my process right there with any external entity that might not be, or I don't want to imply that they aren't technologically literate, but sometimes, and it depends on the regulator. Like sometimes you get different ones that have differing levels of comfort with using AI to make various cuts on documents, and I think that right there, that is going to drive the biggest amount of change. And what I look forward to, in sort of internal investigations, is refining that process and using that.
So Justin, we know that you guys use a self-service tool over at T-Mobile based on our prior conversations. Can you describe some of the benefits you found of using that type of on-demand software or having that available in-house?
Absolutely. It's completely changed the way we do internal investigations, because we can immediately spin up a relativity instance in a matter of, depending on the amount of data, like less than a couple hours, and immediately get in there and start reviewing. There's no project set up. There's literally just pop the files in and go. But the key there, I think, and this is the most important thing, is like if someone is trying to sell you a tool where they're like, you have the tool and now you go use it, and all we do is provide the software license, that's not useful or as useful to me, because at T-Mobile we run a pretty lean team. So to me, I keep, everything's a circle, but I keep coming back to it. It really is the flexibility, right? Like the ability to say, okay, so we've started this review and now we've realized this is too big. I'm going to need some help on it. I can immediately pivot to full service. And that to me is absolutely the most important thing, is that flexibility. And then of course the technology. Like I don't want to be using somebody's kind of what I call like throwaway IP, which is like IP that they acquired in a merger that then some team has been assigned to monetize, and they try to sell me on how much better it is, or like that it's just like relativity. Well, my personal opinion is I'd rather, especially in an internal investigation where speed is usually a very important consideration, to me it's pretty important to be able to have a platform that people know how to use without training. That's like, to me, that's a huge benefit. But then also lower cost and the ability to immediately scale it if I realize we need more resources. So I think like the scalability, the flexibility, and the user knowledge, right? Like the fact that people know how, most attorneys
familiarity with it, yeah,
right, know how to use relativity, right?
Sure.
So that helps a lot when you're driving towards those kind of goals.
So have you identified more ways to utilize this self-service technology or even just improve workflows in other places beyond kind of your initial use case of the self-service tool?
Oh yeah, so that's this. I mean, internal investigations is a great example of that. We weren't thinking about using this for internal investigations when we got it. We thought of this as like a small claims third party subpoena, because I handle basically every third party subpoena for T-Mobile. So that's what we were thinking there. But in the end, we've ended up putting some fairly large amounts of data in it, just because of the one. It's very nice to be able to run the process, get an idea, but then not have to have like an entire, a separate team like already in the data with you. You can really get in there, make a lot of decisions. So yeah, that I did not even consider that internal investigations were what I wanted to use this for. I'm sure that was probably marketed to me, and I just wasn't paying attention. But our use case for it actually didn't involve internal investigations, and then. One day, I can't remember when it was. I want to say it was like probably a year and a half, 2 years ago. Our corporate investigations team had a matter where they just normally what they had been doing was they were literally loading like emails into a dummy Outlook profile and looking through them, right? And we were like, we've got something that could really help you with that. It's a much better process. It's auditable. You can track it. And and
if it turns into something, yeah,
right, exactly, yeah. And so that's where this whole work stream blossomed from. So, and that's the other piece of advice I give people is that I jump into it because it's going to cost you less than your normal relativity instance. 2, you're now training your own people on this technology, which is inherently valuable. Just my opinion. I mean, other people might not agree with that. And then 3, you're going to find out all sorts of things that you're like, oh yeah. Now, once you start using it, you realize, oh, this could be applicable in, this area, this area, this area. And it's also this, this is probably a little bit of inside baseball for people who are like outside counsel or people who aren't working in a house. It's a great tool to be able to sell yourself to other teams. Like here, our team can now help you solve a problem, right? You were loading this in a, dummy Outlook profile or whatever. Hey, let me help you with that, right? But we've got a better way, and we've got this whole process that we can show you on how to do it. So I think that, and naturally those processes build over time, right? We started out with pretty bare bones processes, but now, it's a lot more substantial. So I think that like getting into it, starting to do it, and then figure out your use cases. You need to have 1 or 2 to start, but you'll find more later.
Justin, first of all, thanks so much for doing this. It was great to have you. Always love talking to you about this stuff and about Indiana football, as bad as it is.
One of the 3 Indiana football fans in the world. There are dozens of us. That's right.
Exactly. So you're the one. I think you did a great job. And usually at the end of here, I Paige or I wrap up with a key takeaway. But I think here it really is the comprehensive sort of nature in which you sort of recalled this whole subject. I mean, from everything from how to evaluate how to put together the process, how to attack it, how to staff it, how to evaluate the technology, what you're looking for in the technology, and then how to sell it internally to frankly make your team seem more valuable because you're solving problems for the company. I think the entire, from the beginning to the end of how you started to decide you were going to get into self-service, to how you started to deploy it, to finding a new use for it, and then ultimately finding success for other departments and making your department more valuable. I think that's the key takeaway here, right? Is it's not Absolutely. Sort of a single use. You kept saying flexibility, and I think that's a theme throughout because it's not just flexible in how you evaluated which technology we're going to go to or how you were going to staff a project, but also flexibility in how you were going to deploy the technology. And it sounds like anytime you can find a way to deploy the technology to solve another problem, i.e. being more flexible, it's just going to make it you guys as a group and also the technology that you've adopted more valuable to the company. Justin, seriously, thank you for doing this. Really always love talking to you about this stuff. This was a really great session. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks again, guys.
Great talking to you. Stay up to date on all things Law and Candor by subscribing to our show wherever you get your podcasts and follow us on Twitter at Law and Candor.